Let's vote. Let's all vote. Let's all vote.
This 2020, make sure you're registered. Make sure you go out and vote. Make sure your voices are heard. Make sure our vote counts. Do what we can with what power they have given us.
This November, let your voice be your vote. Please go out and vote. Thank you.
Please remember to register to vote. Your vote counts.
No se les olvide registrarse para votar. Gracias.
Register to vote.
Please register to vote.
Register to vote.
Your vote counts, so please register to vote.
Go vote.
Regístrate, tu voto cuenta.
A vote matters. Please register to vote.
Register to vote because your vote matters.
Please register to vote.
Don't forget to register before the election. Every vote counts.
Please remember to register so that you can vote.
Please register to vote.
I'm not old enough to vote yet, but if you are, please register and put in your vote.
Regístrate para votar.
Please register to vote.
Every vote is important, including yours, so please register to vote.
You want to change, be the change.
Register to vote.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rosalind Overstreet Gonzalez, and I am a member of the Board of Directors for the Educational Foundation of the WNDC. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's third and final video conference, if you will, of the Long Road to Vote. Tonight, we are specifically addressing youth and the youth vote, and we would hope to provide tactics for the new generation on making sure that all people vote. Just as for my only information, and I'd like to know who's here. I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C., so if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, I hope we're national, but put in the chat where you're from, and so we can see just how far our tentacles have stretched, if you will. I would also like to thank all of you educators that are here this evening. I know that this is the beginning of school. I know that, we are in the time of lots of things going on in our country, with the police violence, with the protests, with COVID, just with everything that's going on, and you've given up your time to be here with us tonight, and I thank you. We all appreciate that. I am happy to answer any questions as we go throughout the program, but at this point, I am going to turn the program over to my co-host, or your moderator for the evening, Laura Whitaker. Laura, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Roz, and thanks everybody. I'm seeing a lot of local friends in the chat, but I'm also seeing folks from many other states, and it's great to know that we have a wide audience here. Amy, I'd love it if you could show the slide that has the hurdles on it. I think it's the slide before that. I wanted to just do a super quick problem setup here. We're here because we have a desire, we as educators, but we also as panelists, all have a desire to boost the participation of young voters in the electoral process. The vote is power, as we heard in the film, and young voters face hurdles that can be grouped into categories that include motivating to participate, getting registered, being fully equipped to vote, and then turning out to vote. There's an ecosystem that has built up around, here's the way that little, there are the four things I just said. A little bit of an ecosystem has built up with some of the proven tactics that are shown on the bottom of the little icon. And probably a lot of you who are the adults in the room, meaning the teachers who have their mouths to the ears of many young voters, you think about using things like the when do you think about engaging people around National Registration Day or around Election Day? You think about the where, if you're a high school educator involved with a club or in a classroom on a college campus. We see a lot of youth voter activity focused around extracurricular activities where youth gather, such as concerts or sporting events. And then the how is the toolkit that we want to really build out today. So we want to learn a lot more from that and make this a listening and sharing opportunity from all of the folks that we have here. In this session, we'll hear from folks who are working in that where in the high school and other educator sides, as well as the organizations. The next slide will show you how we're going to spend the remaining 85 minutes or so of this. We will start out with the why of boosting youth voter participation. Andrea Miller from the Center for Common Ground will lay out some information about why it's important for this to be done. The what are the plans? What are the goals for the educators who we have with us and for the educators who are out there to start reflecting on what you're planning on doing across the next 67 or whatever it is days until the election. And then the how is when we have 6 organizations represented by panelists who will share tools and tactics that they've created to fill some of the niches, some of the gaps in that ecosystem of overcoming those challenges to vote. We'll all then come back together for a round table to discuss how to apply those tools into the what. So we'll want to hear from the teachers in the audience via the chat, which is open for all of you for questions, and the teachers on the panel to talk about what they've learned in this session. So feel free to drop a question in, drop an idea into the chat, and we will moderate that once we get to that portion of the evening. Let's start with that why, and I'm going to turn this to Andrea Miller. Andrea is an election turnout strategist with roots in organizing and digital advocacy. She's with us today to basically scare us into doing everything we possibly can to mobilize youth voters between now and Election Day and beyond. But don't cover your eyes in fear because she's got the data to show you the size of the challenge.
Thank you so very much, Laura. I am delighted to be here. What a lot of people don't know is I haven't done elections all my life. I was a teacher for 28 years. So let's go ahead and start my slides, please. And here we come. All right, now, this is the state of voting in the United States. There are 245 million age-eligible voters. Of that 245 million, 48 million are either inactive and or unregistered. Now, these 48 million people were previously registered. They have been removed from the voting rolls by either their county registrars or their state board of elections. In many instances, people have been removed from the rolls for not voting. Of those 48 million, 16.6 million are community of color voters. And those are the voters that we work with for getting them re-engaged, re-registered. Now, another very important number to know is that millennials and Gen Zers represent 37% of the voting age population in 2020, and that number is growing. We are anticipating that by 2024, millennials and Gen Zers will be between 42 and 46% of the voting age population. Next slide. I chose an individual state to give you an idea of what I frequently look at when I examine a state. This is the state of North Carolina. There's a lot of people talking about North Carolina. North Carolina has roughly 6.3 million active voters. 1.4 million are African American, nearly 200,000 are Hispanic, 93,000 are Asian, and 51,000 are Native Americans. North Carolina is 28% community of color. Now, when we look at voters who used to be registered, 1.3 million of North Carolina's voters have been deregistered. That is 21% of the voting age population. Next slide. Let's take a look at turnout. Who actually shows up to vote when there is an election? Now, North Carolina was a Super Tuesday state, so that meant people went to the polls on March 3rd. I want you to take a look at the very first column, the 18 to 24-year-old voters. The first number on the top row is how many of the 18 to 24-year-olds, and now these are community of color voters, this is where I work, how many of them turned out to vote? And the second number is how many were registered. A critical concept for 2020 must be register and vote. 18 to 24-year-olds are registered. They just aren't voters. The number down below, 9%, that was the lowest percentage turnout we had for 18 to 24-year-olds in these districts in North Carolina. The highest percentage turnout I had was 23%. Now go all the way over to the last column on the right. The bottom turnout I had for voters 64 and over was 50%. The highest turnout, 59%. The youth vote at 37% of our voting population is a critical vote. I know many folks are disenchanted. Do not allow that to make you become disenfranchised. Next slide. We have a billboard campaign where we're putting billboards on 125 campuses nationwide. And those billboards basically say, vote your power, because the young generation, you are our power voters. Next slide. We are also asking our younger voters to really consider becoming part of the election infrastructure. We call it the national vote force. So become paid poll workers and help people come in, sign in, help them go and vote. If they've got questions or problems with the machine, help them become the next generation part of our voting infrastructure and create a welcoming atmosphere for many new and/or people who haven't voted in a long time. Last slide. We've created an app, and that app will tell you, no matter what state you live in, how you can become a poll worker and what you need to do. So thank you all very much. I love being here.
Andrea, thank you. The youth voting numbers are pretty stark. And so let's get into a conversation with some of the educators that we have here who are talking to youth voters all the time. We're going to start with Alicia Butler. Alicia is a social studies teacher at McKinley Technical High School in Washington, D.C. She's a recipient of a very distinguished award, the 2019 Daughters of the American Revolution Outstanding Teacher of United States History Award. She's also highly tuned in to the deep and fascinating history in the fight for suffrage, one milestone of which we are celebrating this week. And she actually was the moderator for the panel of academics that kicked off this first one of this three-part series. This is a long way of saying that she's completely exhausted. So let's let her present before she collapses. Lisa.
Hello, once again, I just wanted to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be on this very distinguished panel. I thought that I could maybe go over some talking points that would give insight into how and what I plan on covering as far as the right to vote and the history of voter suppression in this country when the school year starts. This summer, I had the opportunity to teach a course for the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History on voter suppression and the history of the voting rights struggle and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I was terrified to do it. You know, it wasn't just teaching the content that made me nervous, not at all, but it was teaching on a virtual setting. That was terrifying. I had over 300 students registered for the class all over the country, and it was using technology, something I'm not too, confident about. But the respect for my ancestors and kind of my feeling of sense of duty to tell their story wouldn't really let me decline the opportunity. So if you could just lend me your ear for maybe 3 minutes, I'd like to show you, if possible, exactly what I covered and how I structured it and really what I plan on doing for this upcoming, fall. So first and foremost, as far as what our kids, would like to learn, and I think what would really reach them is to make sure that you have an outline for the class. So if you go back to the last slide, that would be great. Make sure that they know exactly what you're going to be covering, and you should have a roadmap. Our kids really wanted to know about race and voting rights. They wanted to know about youth activism. They also had no clue really who was involved in the fight in Selma. I mean, really, just no idea. So really kind of who's who, what were the very important moments? If they can't remember everything else, what should they remember? What was the president's support in that? And they also really wanted to know, well, what's going on today? What are the contemporary discussions? Next slide. Probably one of the most important things that I always say when teaching and what you should be teaching, don't do anything first before you outline what is your purpose, what is the why. I thought that was very, very important. I made sure that, from day one, students knew that what you're going to learn here, you're going to use it as a blueprint to fight voter suppression in your own state. So basically, the students knew that they were going to have the opportunity to research issues regarding the right to vote in their own state, and they were going to come up with an action plan for organizing their peers, their neighbors, their family members against barriers to the right to vote. And I reminded them every class. Also, students really wanted to be engaged. They're tired of just listening to, teachers just, kind of shoot off at the hip and listen to themselves speak. They want to be actively engaged. They want to use the information that you're presenting. They want to think about it. They want to process it. They want to reflect. They want to talk. They want to debate. So I made sure in all of the things that we did, our class practices on the next slide really talks about that. Lots of interactive activities, chats, even if you're doing Zoom, polls, they love that. Give them opportunity with reflection questions at night to really think about what they learned and then come in the next class and talk about it. Next slide. I also made sure that, students really want to be engaged, or they want to be, faced with questions that matter. So for example, for our warm-ups, I would ask them really deep questions. And you see here on this slide, one of the questions that I opened up this particular class was you cannot be afraid to speak up and speak out for what you believe. You have to have courage, raw courage. That was a quote by our beloved John Lewis before he passed. And I had students really think about that. And then I asked them, could you identify and list 1 to 2 causes or principles you think would be worth risking risking your life for, and explain why. Now, I know that's a deep question, but students really had a really good time really taking the minute to pause and really reflect that. And I wanted them to do that because we talked about the fact that these people, these heroes that we're going to be talking about, at the same age as my high school students are, that's exactly what they had to ask themselves as well. Next slide. I also added to that question. We did here a very interactive poll activity where the students had to take that same answer they came up with for the warm-up and then ask themselves, would that factor, cause, or principle you identify in the warm-up also be worth risking the lives of your economic well-being or your family members? Students really got a kick out of that question too. And once again, I always framed it with saying, these are the same questions that 17-year-olds and people even younger than yourself, I teach high school, had to ask themselves. Go on to the next one. You can actually go on to the next slide. The next slides are all just pretty much about content. You can go to the next one. Making sure that you cover that narrative. Next slide. Stop right here. But definitely making sure that when you cover the narrative, students want to know, all right, who else was involved? We know about Dr. King, and he was so important. And we know, you know, about the other of the big name peoples, right? But we really would like to know, what are the unknown voices? Who are the Murrays, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. And they also want to know, go on to the next slide, about people in their community. I teach here in the DMV area, so I definitely made sure that I went over people their age at the time, Barbara Johnson, you know, and people that were also involved in the fight that they may not have heard of or they never will, but I wanted to give them that opportunity. Can we go on to the next slide? So definitely covering those unknown voices. And then when you do cover other incidents in this long fight for the right to vote, make sure that you ask them meaningful questions. All the students have learned about, you know, what took place in Greensboro. Can you go on to the next slide? But not many teachers are giving our students really the opportunity to sit down. All right, now that you've covered this information, some of you have heard it since elementary or middle school. Now think about it. What were the risks? You tell me, what do you think the benefits were? You tell me, why do you think that people that were actually your age were in a better position to protest? And what does that mean for you? These are the type of questions that our students really want to know. Next slide. You can go on to the next one. Definitely continue to cover those big time groups like, you know, SCLC, SNCC as well. Go on to the next slide. You can actually go to the next slide. But also with that, give them really engaging activities to explore the information. So before we even got into the steps for the right to vote in Selma, I first had the students explore a really easily accessible learning tool. I had them go onto YouTube, plenty of great videos there. I actually had them, you know, watch, you know, what is it like to register to vote today? What are the requirements? And this is important because I know that I've got so many students that are going to get ready to vote pretty soon in a couple of years, and they would like to know how to do it. Give them accessible information that can break it down for them. Could you go on to the next one? And then after that, I had my students actually, I forced them to go take a look at what is the current, in the state of Alabama, what does the form look like to register to vote? And I basically, you know, I asked those higher level questions, but I really kind of made them like really dive into the document. What's required to prove you live in Alabama? You know, is there more than one way to prove your residency? How are people who can't read or write still enabled to complete this form? Go on to the next slide. And then after I did that, I asked them, you know, as a group, what do you all think? How easy is it to register to vote today in Alabama for most people, just by what you saw? Go on to the next slide. Most of the students answered it was easy. And then what I did is I went right back to YouTube. YouTube could be our friend, and students love movies. So I went back and I asked them to, let's all take a look at a clip from Selma. And, you know, we watched the incident where, you know, they tried to register to vote and what happened. I had them compare the two. So we looked at how easy it is today so they can appreciate that. But I wanted them to know that road that took us there by having them look backwards. So I always provide some opportunity to kind of link it to what they're learning today. Next slide. Go on to the next one. And then after I do that, ladies and gentlemen, I continue just to, you know, give them opportunities to really put themselves, all about young adults, you know, these people that fought for the right to vote, these young women, these young men. I asked them, how do you think the public would be influenced by having young adults participating in a voting rights campaign? And then, you know, I asked them, why do you think some members of the public would be encouraged or discouraged from joining the movement if young adults are heavily involved? I really just wanted them to, you know, really put themselves in the shoes of people that were, you know, their ages when they fought for the right to vote. Keep going on to the next slide. And then make sure that whatever you do, please offer our students reflection questions that really mean something and really force them to be, you know, active and thinking, how could they be involved in the right to vote? How can I use what I'm learning in class when I leave these four walls, right? So they would get reflection questions every night, no more than 5. And, you know, the type of questions they would get were always almost the same. So for example, if you look at number 2 here, it says, what was one fact you learned from the presentation today that challenged a pre-existing belief you held about today's subject matter? And then I asked them, what's the most important fact you learned from today's discussion that you believe should be included in all American history textbooks and should be taught in schools, and why? And then I would ask them questions like, most of the names of the young adults who participated in these protests will never be included in his history books. Why is their story important? And tell me, what are 2 or 3 points you think young adults today can learn from them? And then one of my favorite, you know, questions always was, and it was always the same one, number 5, always ended it with, what role could you play in disseminating this information in your community and school? And why should you help educate others about the history of Dallas County protesters? Or I would ask them, what role could you do in making sure everybody knew about the gerrymandering? We went over that. Or, you know, why is it important that we learn more about, you know, the effects of the 2013 Supreme Court ruling, and how can you get this information to other people? What's your responsibility? Those were always the reflection questions. So just in ending real quickly, I just wanted you all, you know, really to know that whatever we do in our classrooms, our students really want something that matters. They want to be engaged. And not only that, they want opportunities to be able to learn how can they take what they're learning in class and use it. So a lot of you are saying, well, that's great and everything. But how effective was it? If we can go to the next slide. I got my evaluation and I was a little nervous because I'd never seen these kids. It was all on Zoom. I had kids from all over the country, and they had a series of questions that was actually created by the Institute. And one of the questions was, who's completing the survey? Of course, I had over 89% of the people that did it were students, but I had some parents in there and educators as well. Next slide. How much did you learn about the history of voting rights? Did it stick? Did it resonate? And as you can see here, over 91% of the students said they had learned something that they had never learned before. I'll go on to the next one. The next slide basically says, did this experience make you more excited to learn more about the history of social activism? And in that class of students that I had never met, 89% said they were really excited to learn more about, you know, how, you know, our people in this country have been socially active. And then the last slide, did this experience make you more likely to get involved in your community to eliminate barriers to voting? I really thought that that was pretty much the most important question. And, you know, over, 79% of the students said that, you know, they could not wait to take what they learned and actively use it and be involved to make sure that they can help fight to eliminate barriers to people voting. So, you know, kind of my assessment, I think that it worked. And I plan on doing this more with the incoming students I have this year. And I hope that it provides some insight into exactly what our students would like to learn on the high school level. Thank you.
Alicia, that was amazing. Your curriculum, your focus is definitely the one that's also, because you teach history, is absolutely spot on. But we're going to move over to our next teacher now, who is Alan Baugh. Alan is a Teach for America alumnus. He serves as the English department chair at Forest Hill High School in Jackson, Mississippi. He's also pursuing a master's and apparently eventually a doctorate, focusing on educational studies and policies that advance equity in education and student success. So being a graduate student and a full-time teacher doesn't really explain why Alan has time to also be on a Zoom call with us tonight, but we are grateful for his presence, and take it away, Alan.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Alan Baugh. I teach at Forest Hill High School down in Jackson, Mississippi. This is my 3rd year teaching, and everything in the presentation before is basically what I do as well in the classroom, but I do it through English. A big thing that I focus on my first 2 years teaching, I was teaching sophomores, was just making sure they were able to read and write and critique effectively on any issue that they cared about. So a lot of my lessons centered on what the kids cared about, very, very centered on their culture. Me being from New Jersey and them living in Jackson, Mississippi is 2 different worlds. So I had to understand what world they lived in at first, and then try to create a curriculum around that so that all the lessons and all of the material that I gave impacted the world that they live in every single day. And this year I've been tasked now to teach seniors, and it's ironic that I'm teaching seniors, kids that are 18 going on 19 maybe years old who are able to vote. And I've had to restructure everything that I think about in the classroom of what I want them to read about, what I want them to write about. So we just had our first week of school last week, 100% virtual. And one of the first questions I asked them is, what do you guys want to talk about? And how can I make this class more relevant to you? And one of the things that a lot of my class sections came up with was a lot of these issues that are going on around policing, the Black Lives Matter movement, and politics, Trump versus Biden, and issues that are directly related to their state. They just had a governor race not too long ago, and stuff that he's brought up in the recent history has impacted the lives that they're living every single day. So surprisingly, I have to now become a voting type of teacher, political teacher at the same time, and present material to them that allows them to think, read, critique all of these issues. So the goal for me as an English teacher in my position is to not necessarily push them to pick a side, but push them to be able to think about why they choose the side that they choose. So I have my opinions, of course, as a teacher, and I try to, share as little as I can so I don't sway their conversations. But having those conversations, like it was just presented, having reflection time, having those types of chats, allow them to now look at the world not as just, yeah, it's politics, it's whatever, it's what's on the TV, it's what I see on CNN or Fox or NBC or whatever, but it's actually issues that impact their world. A lot of the projects that I have them do is ways for them to organize as a community in the school to try to bring change there, or maybe for them to go out to their community and ask different community leaders about problems that they have. And in doing that, I think that makes them realize how easy it is to be engaged with issues in their world, but also how fun it could be when they come back and report back in the class of, I talked to this person, I talked to that person, and I raised this point with a community leader, I brought this up to my principal, and I had us all vote on, extending our lunch hour. They now see that direct action can be taken. And if it's an issue that they care about and they research it well enough and are able to present, read, and write on it well enough, then change is possible. So this being my first year teaching seniors, I'm actually here to learn about what you guys are doing and how I can put that into my classroom so that these seniors can be the most well-versed, well-researched new citizens in this country as we're going into this voting year as they can be. But I think a lot of the tactics that I've taken on were already presented on in a way, but that culturally responsive and relevant material has to be at the center of it so that these kids see and can speak on issues that are important to them and not sound like they just read it off of a short tweet or two. So that's all that I have about my practice here in the classroom. So thank you all so much.
Alan, thank you. That's great to hear about it from another academic discipline of English. And we'll turn to our third member of the sort of educator panel, who's Ann McDonough. She's the Deputy Director at the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., which can be found at dchistory.org. Not a classroom educator, but a partner to many teachers and a passionate advocate for D.C. voting rights. Always good to have passion to hook young voters. D.C. rights might not be everyone's passion project, but Ann can describe how to embed this kind of driving urgency into teaching.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here tonight. The Historical Society of Washington, D.C. is an educational nonprofit, and we collect, interpret, and share our local history. We offer support for teachers and education in general from third grade all the way on up through grad school. And to do that, we focus on amplifying voting rights issues in just about everything that we present. The district's lack of representation in Congress is just a fact of life here. It's always been woven into our exhibits, into our workshops, publications, and educational programs. But this year, with funding from the Office of the Secretary of the District of Columbia, we have new classroom tools that explore the issue of voting rights and self-determination for DC residents. Our goal for these tools is to increase awareness of the historical context of the city's lack of voting rights. We're also working to encourage those eligible to vote for president to exercise that right. And our intention is to foster civic engagement by students from elementary school on up and to encourage voting in whatever elections that may be available to them. So how are we doing this? Well, students visiting the DC History Center encounter our 40-foot panoramic timeline of DC history, from the native peoples who lived on this land before Europeans arrived to the present. They see local events, national and international events, which ordinary timeline features on there. But then there's also an unusual separate line that shows the names of DC mayors and when they were elected. Those of you who know our history know that while that line is populated for most of the 1800s, Between the 1870s and 1973, it's blank. And that, of course, is when DC was governed by a presidentially appointed commissioner system. So without fail, students are surprised by this century of absence of local political power, often angry, and always local and motivated to learn more. We engage these students in making the connection to our situation today. We also motivate older students to become politically engaged through Washington History Magazine. The magazine comes out twice a year, and it features original research on local culture, business, and of course, politics. Many issues include a feature called Teachable Moment, which is designed to offer teachers sort of a bite-sized source that invites close analysis and deeper understanding of a single map or a document or a picture. The full run of the journal is available through JSTOR, so it's accessible to everybody. When we're open, our Kiplinger Research Library welcomes students to use our primary and secondary sources, including there's a shot of one of our items on the screen. It's a scrapbook of 2 years of editorials calling for the passage of the 23rd Amendment, which allowed Washingtonians to vote for president in the 1964 elections for the first time since the right to vote for president was taken away in 1802. For students in 9th grade and up who visit the DC History Center, civics is always part of the experience. One popular activity is Freedom and Franchise, which asks them to match the date of a major event in DC history with its description. The 13 events demonstrate the relationship between voting and freedom. Thanks to the Office of the Secretary's grant, we've now translated this from an in-person activity to one that teachers can assign to remote learners through our teaching resources page at dchistory.org. 4 activities are particularly relevant to understanding politics here. One uses a map to show how the carving of the district from Maryland and Virginia led to the loss of voting rights. And in addition, we offer activities on voting rights vocabulary, basic quiz, and a version of the Freedom and Franchise Timeline Scramble. With these online activities, we can now reach students across the country in addition to those in our backyard. Whether or not your students will grow up in DC, the nation's capital belongs to all of them. We hope that knowing that residents still don't have the same rights as citizens in the 50 states is a powerful motivator to go out and exercise their own right to vote and support ours. So.
Anne, terrific. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And as a DC resident, I'm always a big booster of those rights as well. Thank you so much to all the educators. We're going to move over now to the, in some ways I think of these as the armory. These are the organizers that are putting the weaponry, the tools that we can use to engage, register, motivate, enable, and turn out young voters. So our first panelist is Alicia Smith. She's a fellow with Ignite National, which aims to build a pipeline of women pursuing elected office. There's a glowing profile of Alicia on ignitenational.org's site, and it mentions her creation of college chapters and councils and her joy in empowering and in supporting young women who are awakening in their civic engagement. Alicia.
So Ignite National is a nonpartisan organization that trains women to run for office. A lot of our participants are students and they're passionate about changing their communities. They just don't always have the knowledge or the capacity to do so themselves. So that's where Ignite comes in. And then we teach them how to think about like policy and voting and civic engagement through our K through 12 curriculum, our college chapters, our annual conferences, our paid scholarships, the elected network, the alumni network. All of this stuff gets our students civically engaged and wanting to step into public service. And then before 2020, at the end of each year, we would bring all of these students to DC for 3 days to participate in a conference. And so this year we launched Ignite the Vote, where we have 3 tools to increase youth voter participation. And then so it's Sophia the Bot, Ignite, Ignite ambassadors, and then the campus challenge. But the first one is Sophia the Bot. So let's go back to that. Yeah, this is the slide. So Sophia is a chat box that we have on our website. So when you go to our website, she will set up, she makes it a lot easier for the younger generation to get involved to vote, because all you have to do is put in your information, and then she guides you to register, secure an absentee ballot, ultimately cast that ballot. And then we've launched Sophia in all 50 states. So it doesn't matter where you're texting Ignite to 33777, like she will be able to help you get registered to vote, and then also make a practical plan to cast your ballot. And then once you sign up for Sophia, you'll get different emails or texts from us to ensure that you do vote. And then she will let you know the important dates in your state too. So you're always up to date with Sophia. And then we found that it makes it easier for a lot of the younger students to get involved, because you just text the number and then we kind of set up everything for you, or you go on the website and put in your information and we set up everything for you. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so another tool that we're using to increase voter participation is our Ignite the Vote ambassadors. Our ambassadors don't have to have any experience, just a passion for change. And then they can text ITV to 3377 to become an ambassador. And then as an incentive to get them to participate, we give them prizes for every 25 people they engage. The top 2 ambassadors, they get an iPad, they get social media opportunities. A lot of the college students and high school students that we work with, they have different influencers they follow on different social media platforms. So they think it's cool that they can get to chat with them, or they can get to talk to them. And we found that it really helps, because it makes the voting experience and the civic engagement experience a lot easier and more fun for them. And then they get to have a healthy competition. Oh, well, if I do this amount of people, then I can get a prize. And then we're also adding in the mask that you see in the picture. We're adding in different notebooks, different Ignite material, just to help get everyone engaged. And then you can go to the next slide. So the third one was our Ignite Campus Challenge. So we have college chapters, and then the college chapters also compete with each other to get people registered to vote. We have over 200 college chapters, and then they compete with each other in each state to get prizes, and then they also do that nationally. And then we found that so far we've engaged over 100,000 Gen Z voters, or looking to vote this election cycle, and we're hoping to continue that through November and beyond. And then we've also found that it's a lot more, when we use these 3 tools, it's a lot more fun than how we were doing it previously, with just going to the different campuses. This is something everyone can do from home. The students just have to have the internet, they have to have our website, they have to have a phone, and then they can just text Ignite or ITV, and then we can get them started. And then one thing we've also been doing is partnering up with other organizations to put Sophia on their website, or bring an Ignite College chapter, or get them supplies. We've been using different organizations and different participant groups to just help us get this word out. And then, we feel like if there is someone who's interested, and I'll put my information in the chat box too, and then I'll put our website in the chat box just in case anyone has any questions. But this is just 3 ways that we found to increase youth participation. And things have been really successful so far. So we're looking to build on top of that, and then work with other people to learn what they're doing too. And again, I'll put all of this in the chat box.
Alicia, that's tremendous. Thank you so much. I think what Ignite National has, as well as what some of the other organizations that you'll see, is a little bit of an end-to-end set of resources. Our next panelist, who I'm moving up in the order, is Kat Calvin. Kat is the founder and executive director of Spread the Vote, which has a more narrow mission, but it's also vital. It is the mission of supporting voters in overcoming a very distinct hurdle to casting a ballot, which is having an ID. So Amy, I'm sorry to throw you off on the order here, but if you can get a Kat on screen, then here we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Kat Calvin, founder and executive director of Spread the Vote. As Laura said, one of our big missions is helping people get IDs, primarily in voter ID states, and we do work with a lot of students. We're in 12 states, which you can see at spreadthevote.org/states. So if you have students who need ID, whether it's to vote or for anything else, we get DMV IDs. That's a big thing that we help with. Right now, though, for 2020, along with helping folks get IDs, we do a lot of voter education, and we're doing a lot of campaigns and programming to address a lot of the major issues that we see that will either be unique to 2020 or exacerbated because of the 12 apocalypses that we're suffering through this year. And one of the big things we're doing is we are doing virtual online education courses throughout September. You can go to lastelection.org, which lists out a lot of the things we're doing this fall. And with the courses, what we're trying to do is address a lot of the questions that we get just from people all over the place every day. And so, every Wednesday in September, we'll be doing courses with the Campaign Legal Center, Vote at Home, Radical Health, Center for American Progress, a lot of different organizations answering a lot of questions. For instance, how do you read a ballot, which is actually pretty confusing? How do you make sure that you're following the rules when you're voting by mail so that your ballot is actually counted? How to stay COVID safe if you have to go vote in person. We'll be doing a course on how to vote with a disability. We have a really big problem with people with disabilities being discriminated against at the polls, and so we'll be doing a course about what your ADA rights are and how to make sure that people can vote, and really trying to have a series that answers a lot of questions. We'll also at the same time be doing a series of ballot party trainings. I'm a huge fan of ballot parties, mostly because they're parties, but also because it makes a big difference when people get their friends and family and communities together and work through ballots together, talk about ballot measures, and make sure that everyone has their mail-in ballot or their sample ballot filled out so that it's less intimidating when they actually need to vote. And so we'll be doing some trainings on how to have your own ballot party on Skype or Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever, and everything from how to invite folks, and we'll have fun templates for designs for little sort of signs people can hold up, and invites, how to manage the technology, how to read through the ballot with your family, etc. So those are two things that we will be doing, and you could go on lastelection.org and see a lot of the other programming that we have that are really aimed at making sure that we're helping folks understand the issues and the challenges and overcome the obstacles that frequently stop people from actually going to the polls. So you can check out both of those things.
Kat, that's great. We can make sure we drop a link to Spread the Vote and Last Election into the chat. I wanted to ask you something which is a little bit off script, but I know you have to leave. One question about getting IDs for teachers who are teaching students in states where there are IDs. Is there and I know there's a million different answers to this question, but generally, is there it's too late if you haven't gotten your ID by 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out from an election? Do you think it can still be done? What is the latest that is still a viable option for somebody who wouldn't have had an ID to get on that?
Right. So that question, it depends really on how many documents someone has to get. So if you have to order a copy of a birth certificate, for instance, and find proofs of residency and identity, and it can be complicated, and it can take several weeks or more. If everyone has all of their documents, normally we have in the past on election day gone through very long lines and made sure people had IDs and taken some people out of line, taken them to the DMV, and then come back. This year, however, because of COVID, most DMVs are running on an appointment-only basis, and we are in some states where we can't get appointments until December or January or February. So this year, like with voting by mail, well, like everything else, the earlier you start, the better, because it is getting more and more complicated to get to the DMV, to make an appointment. And also with USPS having issues, we right now are in a situation where we've got birth certificates that are getting lost in the mail, other documents that aren't arriving when they're supposed to be. And so we're really, really encouraging everyone to work as early as possible, because we don't know how long things are going to take right now.
Great to know. We'll move that up the urgency list. So stick around as long as you can, Kat. Thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to move now to panelist Hope Ziding-Gokeritz. Hope is the executive director at Voterise, a Utah-based organization focused on voter registration in the 18 to 29-year-old and underrepresented groups. So we're looking forward to hearing more about the Voterise toolkit.
Thanks so much, Laura. and thank you so much for having me. Thank you everybody for being here, taking the time out of your day to talk about something very, very important, but I don't need to tell you that. My name is Hope Zitting-Gokritz. I am the Executive Director of Voterise. Like Laura mentioned, we are based in Utah. However, through our digital channels, we do have reach in all 50 states and DC. Our primary focus, again, is 18 to 29-year-olds, although in Utah, we can pre-register individuals as young as 16 and 17. So we go into, again, pre-COVID, into a lot of high schools and colleges as well to register students. And it's a two-pronged approach, of course. So step one, of course, registering individuals is great, but it doesn't really do much if they don't turn out to vote. So Voterise, we go into classrooms, and currently now we are actually creating videos for high school and college teachers and professors to just copy and paste a link into the virtual classroom. And it will pop up with a video about 8 minutes long, me walking them through a process of step 1, step 2, step 3, how do I get from here to there? What happens if I don't have a photo ID? Everything that they need to actually register to vote, since of course we don't have that in-person contact as, right now. So step 1, getting them registered, and then step 2, making sure they actually turn out to vote. Utah has a very sad modern record when it comes to youth voter turnout. In 2014, only 8.1% of our 18 to 29-year-olds actually turned out to vote. And if anybody knows anything about Utah, there's a lot of kids here. It's a very young state, so that's very disheartening. And since 2014, that number has about doubled, and so it's still about 20%. That being said, in 2018, we were among the 3 lowest states for youth voter turnout in that youngest voting block. The 2 others were Arkansas and New York. So Utah is still trying to get up there. One thing, especially talking to individuals virtually, to make sure that it's very relatable when it in our experience, making sure that the younger generation knows how their vote directly impacts them. For example, there might be a bill on your state capitol or state legislature, and it's talking about no student cell phones on campus. Let them know about that, and just gasps like, oh my goodness, no, I need my phone. Like, I've got to vote, kind of giving that relatability to those students. And through studies that we've done, we found out that 18 to 29-year-olds actually care less about political parties, and they're more issue-based. So making sure that you're catering to that one issue that they care about, whether that's climate change, gun control, tuition, anything that will strike them and help with that relatability. So with that turnout, making sure they actually turn out to vote. Voterise actually sends out 1 text or 1 email before every single election, so primaries in general, with a nonpartisan customized voter guide. And within that guide, it actually has every single person and amendment and proposition on their ballot that will be mailed to them. Utah is a universal by-mail state. We have been since about 2012. It's been working great for us. About 90% of our registrants actually do utilize vote by mail, and we're a very red state. So vote by mail has actually worked for a lot of Utahns. That being said, though, we do always have in-person voting or drive-by voting. So Utah is actually very progressive when it comes to voting laws and educating those students on, you can pre-register to vote at 16 or 17. And including that in the get out the vote, my nearest ballot drop box, or when do I need to postmark my ballot. Making sure that the students have all that information is really, really critical. With that 1 text or 1 email we send out, we have a 75% turnout rate among our registrants, which is really, really big in Utah. So some of the tools we've been utilizing include, virtually speaking to students, but if that's not possible, creating tools like videos for those teachers to just copy and paste into their classrooms.
All right, Hope, you're wrapped up? Thank you.
Yes. Thank
Got
you.
it. Sorry about that. No, that's great. We are going to move to a two-person presentation here. Sandra Mitrovich is a fellow at the National Congress of American Indians, which houses Native Vote, which is a nonprofit initiative driving revitalized engagement with American Indian and Alaska Native voters. And she is joined by her colleague, Matt Johnson.
Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Sandra Mitrovich, and I work with the civic engagement team here at the National Congress of American Indians. And I apologize, my video is not on. If the host could start it for me, please. One thing that is really exciting for us to have at the National Congress of American Indians is to focus on civic engagement. Our civic engagement components include both census and Native Vote. As we know, this year they run parallel, so it's really important for us. On our slideshow presentation, we're going to discuss some very important pieces to Native Vote. If you could advance the slide, please. We're going to be talking a little bit today about the fact that NCAI's National Nonpartisan Initiative, it partners with Native Vote coordinators around the country. We already heard from some of our presenters. One of our main focus is to get that grassroots coordination going across Indian country, specifically within our tribal nations, and we do that in a variety of different ways. On the next slide, you're going to see how we kind of start to lay out our agenda for the Native Vote campaign. The first and important pillar that we focus on is voter registration and getting out the Native vote. We do that in a variety of ways with our communities, mostly through our grassroots coordinators that sign up and volunteer to be coordinators for the Native Vote campaign. Following that is election protection, and we really focus on, what are the voter suppression, the challenges to voting across the country. And you heard a little bit about that in the curriculum that was presented earlier. It's also part of our teacher toolkit curriculum that I'll talk about in just a second. That third part is education. That's what we're here for today, to really work on those curriculum pieces that we can get into our educators' hands, talking with our students about history of voting, but also how they can do that effectively in community. Last but not least is data collection. I really enjoyed the beginning of this presentation. When we look at the numbers and we know where we stand, we know where we can go and how to get there. And so I think the data part is really important. We have a policy research center that collects that data for us and helps inform. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about that teacher toolkit that I mentioned previously. That teacher toolkit really focuses on getting out the education pieces for our students. And so we're looking at in that toolkit a historical timeline of voting. Most often people don't know that Native American people were not citizens until 1924. And then beyond that, really did not earn that right to vote till 1970. And so sometimes when we don't know some of those historical pieces, we're not able to really connect with some of those families and students about some of their challenges in voting. Within that toolkit, you'll also note there's a lot of different trivia questions to work with students. There's a lot of other graphics and opportunities to really engage your students. And then a supplement to that, on the next slide, I'll go over some of the other resources that are available on our website. And while I'm speaking, Matt Johnson, my colleague, who's the other Civic Engagement Associate at NCAI, will be dropping in some different links into the chat box. So on our webpage, nativevote.org, we have some resources for you that's a supplement to the toolkit. We have an online voter registration portal that people can utilize, especially if they're just kind of looking to get online and register to vote. We have some pre-recorded, definitely some different Native Vote webinars that kind of walk people through voter registration drives, how to set up some different pieces of engagement in community, also some different folks that have recorded PSAs. So if you're looking for public service announcements in your community or to share those out, they're listed on our NCAI YouTube page. We also partner with Rock the Vote for our Native curriculum lesson plans, and so there's some of those on there as well. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some other ways to engage community. We also engage in high school education week. So I know that's coming up in September. September 21st kicks that off. So if you're looking at some dates to really engage your students and get some programming going, you can do, as somebody mentioned in the curriculum previously, you can use our teacher toolkit to do those mock elections, focus on how to practice those voter registration forms. We have a very basic one that's part of our toolkit. We also did a social media challenge, and right now, of course, in a virtual environment, that's really crucial, and so we're seeing that across the board. Many of our national partner organizations are doing some creative challenges. Illuminative, if you've ever heard of them, they're doing a creative challenge right now to engage Native youth. They put out a wonderful survey in partnership with Center for Native American Youth, who's also doing an art challenge. Those are great ways. You can see some of the logos here on the screen, just to engage students and really getting creative and thinking about how they make their voice more visible in voting in general, but also kind of just activating in their community. Our Native communities are very unique and distinct, and so we really want to make sure that their voice is heard. On the next slide, we also want to think about how are we going to engage some other opportunities between now and Election Day and really use our youth in a lot of these different activities. And Matt's going to go through these really quickly.
Thank you, Sandra, so much. So as you can see on the screen here, there are many different ways to get out the vote, specifically with us getting out the Native vote. Phone banking, text banking are probably the two best ways to do it, especially because door knocking is not necessarily as easy to do these days because of COVID. You know, posting flyers, whether that's in person in a common location or, you know, online is another way. Voter pledges, you know, trying to get confirmation from people, I'm going to vote this year, is also a great way to really kind of hold people to the fire and really get them ready to vote. You know, digital GOTV or get out the vote, social media, as Sandra mentioned, and I think we all know is going to be a huge and key factor in that. Transportation to the polls, that's really important, particularly if you live in an area where your polling location is not nearby or you don't maybe have the same kind of transportation needs, you know, making sure to have that plan. And finally, locating your early vote locations, ballot drop boxes, and of course, election day voting sites as well. You know, there are a lot of different ways to vote. And a lot of times you really got to know where you got to go. I know for myself, I try to early vote, but it's not at my normal polling location. I have to go to one of those centralized locations. Ballot drop boxes, of course, have really been in the news recently with all the talk about the postal service and getting mail-in ballots in that way. And of course, you know, just making sure you know where your election day voting site is, because the last thing you want to do is to go to, you know, you think it's the local high school and you go in there and it turns out it was actually a church that's in the opposite direction and you can only vote, you don't have enough time to go to the other location, so you have to cast a provisional ballot, which is kind of requires you to go through some more hoops to really get it counted. And finally, just if voter protection, this is something like, if you ever see anything at a polling location or something that doesn't seem right, you can always call 866-OUR-VOTE to really get out that information to, you know, there are lawyers who, their whole job on election day is just to make sure that people are right to vote is not being infringed. And so that's something that we, of course, encourage and want to make sure that folks are able to do that as well. I think our last slide is just, you know, where you can find us. And, you know, thank you so much for joining us. There's our Twitter handles as well as our website. Also, I just want to put in here, and I'm entering in the chat now, there is we're working with a group called Seating Sovereignty, and they're going to have a 12-hour marathon, or telethon, I should say, but it'll be online, not on TV, called Radicalize the Vote, and I put in the website there. It's a great chance to really, you know, hear from a lot of Native speakers talking about the importance of registering to vote, and we'll be involved in it as well, and just for encouraging everybody to join us as well.
Sandra and Matt, thank you. Terrific to see this focus on a specific community, but I think a lot of the tactics that you used, will be using there, are universal to voters of all nations, of all people in the U.S. So thank you. Kathy Chiron is our next panelist. She's the president of the League of Women Voters of Washington, D.C. The League's chapter here in the nation's capital has rolled out some very cool and active ways to engage young voters. Kathy also has a very cool outfit on today, and the League also supports a very robust site, vote411.org, that Kathy will tell us more about.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for including the League in this program. It's been fabulous, as have the other programs of the last couple of days. So thanks for organizing all this. I'm Kathy Chiron, the president of the League of Women Voters here in DC, maybe someday Douglas Commonwealth. The mission of the League of Women Voters is to empower voters and defend democracy. So clearly this time of year, we're pretty full on. Laura mentioned our website, vote411.org, which is the one-stop shop for everything that voters and candidates can use. It is a trusted, nonpartisan information, as it says, election information you need. So there are links to registration, where all the polling places are, where the drop boxes are for vote at home ballots. And the most unique, and I think maybe the most useful piece, is also nonpartisan information on the candidates. The League works very hard to write questions, and I think all of you know how hard it is to write a question that isn't leading in any way or, you know, trying to get the answer you want to hear. And we ask that to all the candidates, and I think actually there is a candidate who participated in Vote 411 in the DC primary on this call tonight. So it's a great tool for candidates because now with COVID, they're not doing so much face-to-face campaigning, but also for voters. And we know one of the reasons that young people didn't vote in the numbers they should have in the last election cycle is because they didn't know where to go for nonpartisan information. They were sort of flustered by, you know, the very polarized information that's coming out on other media. So the League this year is also sponsoring a poster contest for kids of all ages. There are prizes. We'll probably use some type of ranked choice voting to help decide the winners. And there's a raffle for any of the teachers or camp counselors or youth group leaders who recommend this to students, want to participate. There's a raffle for prizes for the grown-ups as well. On our website is also a teacher toolkit with ready-to-use activities. Just, you know, you need that lesson, boom, we got it, ready to go. There you can be done online or in person. And they're all very interactive. They're promoting student agency, and the students really are the ones doing the work. We're also available, of course, to come into classrooms. One of the fun things we did last spring before all of this mess hit us is we went in and worked with a group of 5th graders in one of our DC charter schools and trained them all to do voter registration. And then they went up to the high school and helped all the high school students register. And it was fantastic. It was really, really exciting and fun. And I think we grew some voters in those 5th grade kids who are really, they were very pumped. They also held a voter registration table at one of the back to school nights for the parents. And they were very proud of themselves. It was really very cool. An idea that came up last night at a League meeting was a group that was going to do a walk around their neighborhood to see where all the vote at home drop boxes would be. And I think that would be a great activity now that we could do in our neighborhood walks. And you can find the locations of all those boxes, at least in DC, on Vote 411. And one of the other panelists talked about BYOB parties, and that's something the League is going to be doing as well. So bring your own ballot party. So I think that'll be good fun. And the last thing I will leave with you is we're all concerned about how long it's going to take to get those results, right? We're not going to wake up on November 4th and have the definitive answer. So we really want to encourage everybody to vote early. And again, someone at last night's program said, the longer you wait, the longer you will wait. So take advantage of voting at home, get your ballots done and submitted into the drop boxes. Next choice might be the post office. And after that, take advantage of early voting. In DC, there certainly is, and in other states, I know there are people on the call from elsewhere. Check where your early voting dates are. Generally, the lines are much shorter and it's really much easier. And also, I would urge you to encourage young people also to make sure the whole exercise of voting is positive. And if they're on that, standing in the queue for hours and hours and hours, they're not going to be so happy about this. So take advantage if you have vote at home opportunities or early voting. So thanks.
Great, Kathy. Wise words on the advice there, but also very helpful to have all the access to the resources that can be used by students, teachers, and any other citizens out there. We're going to come to our last panelist on the organization side, and that's Tiffany Johnston. Tiffany is the Executive Director of Turnout Nation, which focuses on turnout via relational organizing, among other tactics. So to hear how to get all of these registered voters who now have their IDs and they know where their ballot boxes are to actually turn out and vote, here is Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, I'm Tiffany Johnston. I am the new Executive Director of Turnout Nation. This is my 3.5 week with Turnout Nation. And I'm actually coming from the school system, coming from Philadelphia School District. So hello to my fellow educators. But yes, Turnout Nation is a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we focus on sort of voter engagement and increasing voter engagement through relational organizing and the friend-to-friend mobilization. So to all the organizations that are working on, you know, getting individuals registered to vote, things like that, we're on the voter side, but we do some of the voter engagement on the registration side as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So Turnout Nation's primary targets are young and disenfranchised voters. And like I mentioned, our primary focus is to leverage established relationships. So we don't use many of the traditional voter techniques, you know, canvassing, things like that. We think utilizing pre-existing relationships sort of minimizes the awkwardness of interaction and increases the likelihood of voting. So we pretty much get individuals to ask their friends and family to vote. And we do have targeted numbers based on states, and we have national goals. But we really think that sort of mobilizing socially and politically engaged people, individuals feel more comfortable with their friend getting them to vote than a stranger. And so that's sort of our tactic. We do this through what we call captains. So captains are our main way of sort of getting out the vote and getting individuals to vote. And our captains are recruited through a mixture of social media ads, personal connections, and partners with various organizations. And the captains are sort of organized under what we call an organizer. Sorry to use that word again. So every organizer has about 20 to 30 captains that they oversee, just to provide them tools with how to engage with your friends if, you know, you're worried about them not really voting, how to connect them to resources that a lot of you already have, which I would love to sort of share on our website and social media as well. And then how to get your friends to the polls on, you know, on voting day, or how to get them to mail in their ballot when it's due or before it's due. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we are actually running a voter registration campaign on TikTok, and it is to target young voters and even individuals that are younger than the voting age to get their friends and family to vote. And we have a sort of a paid prize for, you know, creativity, voter engagement, and how many people you get to register to vote, which is kind of cool. And you know, I would love to share that information. Laura, I don't know if you can share the information that I sent you with the entire group, but that's sort of what we're doing. We're leveraging our personal relationships and just trying to make a difference.
Tiffany was kind enough to send us some things. We weren't fast enough to turn them around and make them into graphics. We'll put them on our website, and there's some good infographics about the Turnout Nation tactics. So sorry about that. We'll just have to have it be a follow-up action.
It's perfectly fine. I'm not a slideshow type of person, unfortunately. So infographics are kind of the world that I live in. But what our method does, and why being a captain is so important, is that anyone can be a captain. It can be your retired grandmother to a full-time college student to, you know, your neighbor, you know, and without our captains, we're unable to achieve our goals. So the captains are really like the heart of our organization. And there are studies done on our organization as well. There's a study done earlier in 2020 through Columbia University that, you know, said that our method of sort of leveraging personal relationship is 10 times more effective than door-to-door canvassing, which is pretty strong and powerful. We utilize an app called Empower to facilitate our voting initiative, and it tracks information. So we collect some really good data about who becomes a captain, you know, how to get disenfranchised voters to actually vote. And I guess the highlight of it is that our technology allows for social distancing and quarantine measures. So you don't have to, you know, interact with anyone personally, which is safer. So yeah, that's sort of what we're doing at Turnout Nation. You know, like I mentioned, I'm sort of new there, but I'm working on a lot of other initiatives. And, you know, I would love to partner with some of the organizations here or anyone that's interested in learning more about our TikTok challenge. You can contact me directly, and that's all I had.
Thank you, Tiffany. We got through it. We got through the panelists. I think this is when we kind of want to have everybody come back into the conversation. Roz and I are going to do a little bit of a facilitate some questions and answers. Unless, Roz, you have anything off the top of your head, I have a question that I want to put to Alan, so I hope you've been paying attention to our sole educator still on the line, who's got a classroom-facing role. And I wanted to ask, you heard about a mix of tools here. We heard about so many different things that are focused on different demographics and different ways of going about it. And I wondered how you thought about using a blend of all these different tools, picking maybe one week, moving on to a different set of tools the following week. What's the complexity involved in that? Do you prefer to pick one thing and then just go with it? How do you think about that, just so the other teachers on the line might be able to think, okay, I've heard about a lot of things. How do I make this real and make it more effective?
I think a big piece of making all of these different projects and organizations work is kind of like what I said at the beginning of, like in my intro, of finding what the need of each community is, or each school, or each district. So I know for my school, one of the big things that I know I compete against while I'm teaching and trying to raise the awareness of the importance of voting and being active for my students is just that for my students, a lot of them are low income. So economics is a big piece for them. And the issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis make politics almost irrelevant, even though politics is directly tied to their situation. They're more locked in on, well, what do I got to do today to get to tomorrow? Or what do I have to do today to be set for next week? So some of the programs may not necessarily work if we just say, you know, come in here and register and let's raise awareness about why it's important to vote. When in their mind, voting is that's the thing that they think about the day before it's election day. And maybe they'll go do it if they have time. So it's about taking the root of the programs of all these organizations, which all are amazing and could very well work. I'm thinking for my district, my school district. But it's also not just trying to put a blanket program in every single city and every single area. Just like how I think it was Utah that was named as a specific area. There's issues that Utah has that New Jersey doesn't, that Mississippi doesn't even think about. But then there's issues that Mississippi has that Jersey would never think about, that DC may think is the biggest problem in the world. So it's about structuring the program as well to be relevant to the city that it's in, rather than just trying to have a blanket thing for all voting. That's the best answer I've got for it.
Thank you. I know that a number of folks, this is Rosalind, are interested in what you all have presented this evening. It's been fantastic, and I personally have learned a lot. I kind of wish I was a student once again, because you all are so engaging, and I feel like learning would be both fun and very instrumental in my future. So I thank you for your innovative ways of interacting with your students and inspiring us in adults to get engaged as well. The information I can tell you will be available on our website. That's the EF website of the WNDC. A number of folks have asked about the recording, about some of the presentations that have been presented, and I am fortunate to say that it will be available, so we can all go back and learn a little bit more, or correct our notes if we miss something. I'm going to leave the final moments to Laura, but I just want to thank you all for being here. I know, as I said in the beginning, this may be the beginning of school, or many of you may already be in school. And so to give up your time this evening to educate us and to tell us what you're doing in your respective school districts is very much appreciated. I also want to thank all of our partners who have helped us put together this entire series, which started yesterday and is concluding this evening. Because again, you all were just so gracious to share what you know and to teach us and to educate us. And we could not have done this without you. The task seemed monumental, and I was very nervous to begin with, even for the welcome, but you made me feel very much at ease. And I thank you again for your participation. I will leave now and turn the mic over to Laura for any final comments. And if you all have any questions of us, or if we can provide anything more, I know we can't pay you back for all that you've done, but we're very, very appreciative. So Laura, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Well, Roz, you're a master at this, because you were supposed to be the final person, so now you put it on me. So good job. Actually, there was one idea that I had, and I know, I think it's probably almost overwhelming for some of the folks in the audience to think about what are the elements that they would be applying into their curriculum. But I had an idea that I wanted to throw out to the panelists, which would be, would there be any interest in reconvening with an audience of educators in late November, early December, after the election, and to say, what did we do? How did Native Votes numbers stack up? What happened with League of Women Voters for Vote411.com visitors? How many captains did Turnout Nation, let's see the TikTok video that won the prize. Whatever are the metrics, and to maybe just discuss a little bit of what we learned, what you guys managed to do as the organizers, but also hear from like the Allens and the Alicias of the world. What did you see among your students? And do a little bit of a follow-up. And we're going to be getting ready for 2022. We'll be around the corner before we know it. So wanted to just put that out there. If anybody wants to unmute and either tell me I'm a raving fool or have ideas about that, we'd love to hear about that.
Hi, this is Anne. I just want to jump in and say I would love to get a student's perspective as part of that panel as well, to see, we're saying what we think is going to work, right? What's going to reach them, but where should we have been? Alan, you're saying that the students are, they're concerned about things like what they're going to eat. Maybe is it that you need to have voter registration at a food bank? Maybe you have to go to the places where they're going to have to go anyway, and make it sort of a wraparound service. And so I think hearing from a student would be really helpful in that too.
Yeah, I know that's definitely a big thing that my students bring up all the time, where they even talk about, we have started talking about, the social things that have been going on all of 2020 at the beginning of our school year, and how they do feel like, especially where they're from, Mississippi's not a state that a lot of people think about going for any type of big event. It's New York's, it's the LA's, the Florida, the Miami's, where they even feel left out of a lot of the conversations. So putting it in their face in a way and making an effort to be in those spaces is major. I like that idea of just putting it where they have to be. You have to be at a gas station. You got to get some gas. So maybe there's something we do right here. We can do it quick, or at a food bank where people maybe we're sitting and can have conversation in that community, in that space as well.
I love the idea of having not even just us, but maybe each person brings a student or a captain or a person that you got to the person who won the TikTok challenge, the person who did the some of the things that the Radicalize the Vote telethon, etc. Some of these things where we have folks who are involved and inspire us to keep on pushing. And maybe Andrea can bring us some more data and see if any of this has made a difference, and we can get the 18 to 24-year-olds to turn out like their boomer grandparents. We'll see. It's a challenge. We all know it's an uphill battle. I think we're going to let you guys have a couple minutes back, and I wanted to just close with, again, gratitude, also acknowledgement that it's a tough. It seems like it's tough a lot of days. You know, the NBA, the WNDCEF, some other sports teams have taken the night off. They've said that's a discretionary activity. We're taking the night off. We felt it was important to continue to do this panel because voting is not a discretionary. This is the kind of advancement and work that we need to keep doing in order to preserve what's most important to us in our communities, in our democracy. So be gentle with yourselves. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your friends in your community. We'll all stay in touch with you. We'd love to promote all the organizations, resources that you have, and we'll get back in touch about doing a follow-up. But until then, enjoy the rest of the evening, and thank you so much for being here.
And may I also just say that we were supposed to be doing this tomorrow, Friday, but we also want to acknowledge the anniversary of the march. So if you're not going to be there, and maybe you're participating virtual, send good vibes. And that too is part of our struggle to unite everyone and to also make our voices be heard. So as Laura said, thank you all very much for being here. Be graceful, give yourself some grace and enjoy the evening.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.